So let's talk about what the 95% confidence in a 95% confidence interval actually means. So suppose I was interested in finding the average height of students at Western. So I take a random sample of 100 students, I find their average height, and I construct a confidence interval. Okay, then I take a totally different random sample of 100 students at Western, I find the average for those students, and I construct a new confidence interval. So it's going to be slightly different than the other one, but probably some overlap. And then I do that again. I pick another random sample of 100 students, find their average, and construct a new confidence interval. Okay, and I do this over and over and over again. When I do that, I would expect that 95% of all of the intervals I make are going to contain the true population mean somewhere within the interval. And 5% of the intervals are going to be a complete miss. They won't have that true population mean anywhere within the interval. So if I made 100 confidence intervals, I would expect 95 of them to contain the true population mean, and 5 of them would be a miss. If I did 1,000 confidence intervals, then 950 of them would contain the true population mean, and 50 of them would be a miss. So to figure that out, you take the total number of confidence intervals that you're going to construct, and you multiply by the confidence percentage. So 0.95 for a 95%, 0.9 for a 90%, and so on. So let's look at an example where we're going to construct 20 confidence intervals, and how many of those are going to be a miss and how many of those are going to be a hit. Okay, so in this example, 20 confidence intervals were constructed, and these were constructed at the 95% confidence level. Okay, so these dots here represent the average for each random sample, and then this line is the entire interval. So this interval goes from about 63 to 68. This one here looks like it goes from about 62 to 67. Okay, so in this example, we actually know what the true population mean is. That true population mean is 65. And when we look at these intervals, we see that most of them have the true population mean somewhere in them. Some of them are really close to the center. So that center of that interval actually is really close to the true population mean. And some of them just barely capture that population mean. Okay, so the interval somewhere in there, could be towards the middle, it could be towards either end, but somewhere within the interval, 95% of the intervals are going to contain that true population mean. And 5% of the intervals are going to be a miss. So this interval here doesn't contain that value of 65 at all. So this interval is a miss. Okay. If we did 20 intervals, and these are 95% confidence intervals, and we would be multiplying by 0.95, which gives me 19. So I would expect 19 of these to contain the true population mean, and I would expect one of them to miss. So I'd take that leftover percentage, that 5%, and multiply it by the 20, and that tells me how many intervals are going to be a miss. Okay. So that's what the 95% confidence means. It means if we repeat this process of constructing confidence intervals over and over and over again and keep taking new random samples and making more intervals, whatever our confidence percentage is, so in this case 95%, 95% of those intervals should contain the true population mean. 5% of them would be a miss. If we did a 90% confidence interval, 90% of the intervals we made would contain the true population mean. 10% of them would be a miss. Okay. So you noticed in the previous video that the higher your percentage, the wider the interval got. Okay, so the reason for that is that the more confident you are, you have to give something up for that. So I could tell you that I am 100% certain that your grade in this class is somewhere between a 0% and 100%. That's not really useful information. You probably already knew that, right? Okay, but if you wanted me to narrow your grade down a little bit more, you have to give up some certainty. Okay, so maybe I'm 95% certain that your grade is somewhere between an A and a B. Okay, so that when you give up some of your certainty, it allows you to narrow that interval down. Okay, but it does mean that more of those intervals are going to be a miss. All right, so I hope that that kind of gives you some insight into what that confidence percentage actually means. But if you have questions, feel free to drop me an email or hit me up on Zoom for office hours.